Usually when you take a personality test, you're basically just handed a behavioral checklist, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, do you like mingling at big parties or, staying home with a good book?
Right. Or maybe, do you keep a meticulously clean inbox, or is your desk just a total disaster?
And then the test tallies up all those habits, points at you, and says, boom, there it is. You're an organized extrovert.
Which is fine. I mean, it categorizes the observable. It puts a label on the things you already know you do.
Right?
But when you step into the framework of the Enneagram, that entire behavioral checklist just completely goes out the window.
It really does.
Today, we are doing a deep dive into a psychological system that ranges from, honestly, 4th century monks to modern corporate boardrooms.
Yeah.
And the wild thing is, it genuinely does not care what you do. It only cares why you do it.
Yeah, the shift from observing your actions to actually diagnosing your hidden motives is just profound.
And we have a really fascinating stack of sources to unpack for you today. We're tracing the Enneagram's esoteric history, looking at a massive academic psychometric study on its reliability, and even digging into how leadership experts are utilizing it right now.
Because this is a system that just demands you look at the underlying engine of your choices.
Exactly. Like, if you have two people who both work 80 hours a week, a normal behavioral test just groups them together as highly driven.
Right, but the Enneagram separates them. It points out that one of them is working out of a desperate need to be admired, while the other is, like, working out of a deep-seated terror of poverty.
So the behavior is identical, but the internal universe is entirely different.
Completely different.
So to understand how this system became so uniquely focused on those hidden motivations, we have to look at how it was stitched together across centuries. And you don't just find the origins of the Enneagram in some single university psychology lab.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
You actually have to travel back to the deserts of the 4th century.
Which is wild.
Right. I mean, the word itself is literal. It comes from the Greek ennea, meaning 9, and gramma, meaning a drawn figure or model. But the psychological DNA takes us back to a Christian monk named Evagrius Ponticus.
Okay, so a desert monk.
Yeah, he lived this highly ascetic life in the desert, and he spent his time identifying what he called the 8 logismoi.
Which translates to evil thoughts or demons, according to the sources.
Yes, but in a very specific operational sense. He wasn't talking about little monsters. Evagrius was diagnosing the core internal obstacles that block a person's spiritual growth.
Like what?
He listed things like gluttony, avarice, anger, vainglory, and acedia.
Acedia? What's that?
It's like a kind of spiritual sloth or profound apathy. And when you map these ancient logismoi out, they actually serve as the direct ancestors to what the modern Enneagram calls the passions.
Which are the unconscious compulsive vices that drive the different personality types today.
Yeah.
So you have a desert monk diagnosing the human condition. But the symbol itself, like the actual 9-pointed star inside a circle, that doesn't even show up until the 20th century.
Right, and that comes courtesy of an incredibly enigmatic figure named George Gurdjieff.
Yeah, Gurdjieff, an Armenian Greek philosopher who basically spent years traveling across Central Asia just gathering esoteric teachings.
And the thing is, Gurdjieff was not administering personality tests at all.
Not even close.
He taught a philosophy he called the Fourth Way, and he used the 9-pointed Enneagram symbol as a universal process diagram. He honestly believed it mapped the fundamental laws of the cosmos.
The sources describe it almost like a mathematical algorithm or like a musical scale.
Yeah, Gurdjieff claimed the symbol represented the law of 3, which is mapped by the inner triangle.
Okay.
And the law of 7, which is that strange, jagged outer shape connecting the numbers 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, and 7.
Right, so for him, it wasn't a static label for a person. It was a map of how any process unfolds, hits friction, and transforms. Whether that's a living organism, a chemical reaction, or a human endeavor.
And while all his cosmic mathematics might sound, totally disconnected from modern psychology, Gurdjieff actually introduced several foundational concepts that form the bedrock of the Enneagram we use today.
Like what?
Well, first and foremost is this major distinction he made between essence and personality.
Oh, right. Essence being who you actually are before the world gets its hands on you.
Exactly that. He believed our true, unconditioned nature is our essence. But, as we grow up, we face trauma, societal expectations, pain.
Just life happening.
Right. So to protect our essence, we build a personality. It's this rigid, socially acquired shell formed by imitation and conditioning. Basically, it's a survival mechanism.
So the personality isn't even something to be proud of. It's the armor you wear because you forgot how to live without it. that fundamentally changes how you view a personality test, honestly.
Completely.
Ah,
And Gurdjieff also brought in the practice of non-judgmental self-observation, this idea that you have to step outside of yourself to literally watch your armor operate.
wow.
And he introduced the three centers of human intelligence: the intellectual, the emotional, and the moving instinctive.
Which is huge because those three centers are critical and they totally survived the transition into the modern era.
Yeah, they did.
And that transition happened in the late 1960s in South America, right? That's where the modern Enneagram of personality was actually synthesized.
Yep. A philosopher named Oscar Icasso took those ancient vices from Evagrius and mapped them onto the 9 points of Gurdjieff's symbol.
He called this proto-analysis, right?
Yeah, proto-analysis. It provided the psychological skeleton.
But a skeleton needs meat. And that's where Claudio Naranjo enters the picture.
The psychiatrist.
Exactly. He was a Chilean psychiatrist who took Icasso's framework and basically applied heavy-duty 20th century clinical psychology to it.
He used Gestalt therapy, didn't he?
He did, which focuses intensely on a person's present moment experience and physical reality. And he used that alongside psychoanalysis, the Freudian practice of digging deep into the unconscious mind.
So Naranjo combines all of this to create the detailed psychological portraits of the 9 types we recognize today. But there is a catch here.
Yeah, there is a pretty massive historical controversy regarding Naranjo's exact methodology.
Right. The sources highlight that Naranjo openly claimed he utilized automatic writing and enhanced states of consciousness to develop these 9 type descriptions.
Which is a huge departure from clinical observation. I mean, how do the sources reconcile an academic psychiatrist using seemingly mystical practices to finalize a psychological framework?
Well, the sources show a really stark divide here. They offer 2 totally different interpretations. On one side, Christian critics express deep concern.
Understandably.
Yeah, they argue that practices like automatic writing historically involve the channeling of potentially demonic spirits. So they view the entire foundation of the Enneagram as spiritually suspect.
Which is a valid perspective to highlight from the sources. But then Naranjo's defenders frame the exact same events through a totally clinical lens.
Exactly. They point out that he was a PhD qualified medical doctor. So his use of enhanced states of consciousness was basically just 1970s terminology for accessing a deep psychological flow state.
Oh, like the kind of profound intuition that artists or inventors tap into.
Right. And automatic writing is framed by his defenders not as channeling spirits, but as a psychological technique similar to Freudian free association.
Where you deliberately relax the conscious mind to bypass your own intellectual blocks, just letting your subconscious connect the dots on the page.
Exactly. And honestly, whatever process Naranjo used, the framework he ultimately synthesized proved to be fundamentally different from existing psychological typologies.
Because it codified the idea that our behaviors are merely symptoms of a deeper unconscious emotional struggle.
Right. Let's compare it directly to something super recognizable like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, or MBTI.
Oh, perfect. So MBTI is basically like looking at the make, model, and paint job of a car. It tells you that you are an introverted, intuitive, thinking, judging vehicle.
And it categorizes your observable preferences. Plus, those preferences remain relatively stable over your life.
But the Enneagram, by contrast, is like the diagnostic computer you plug into the dashboard.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. It exists to tell you exactly why the check engine light is flashing. It really doesn't care if you're an extrovert or an introvert. It exposes the core fears and desires driving the engine.
And it organizes those core fears into those 3 centers of intelligence Gurdjieff mentioned: the gut, the heart, and the head.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of this, starting with the gut, or instinctive center, which houses types 8, 9, and 1. Their underlying engine is anger.
Right.
Now, wait, type 8 is the challenger, so anger makes total sense there. But type 9 is the peacemaker. Calling a peacemaker driven by anger seems entirely contradictory.
It totally does, until you look at the mechanism of how they actually handle it. An 8 acts their anger out, right? They use it as aggressive fuel to protect themselves and challenge the world.
Okay, yeah.
A 9, however, is terrified that their anger will destroy their connections and just disrupt their environment, so they narcotize it.
They numb it out.
Exactly. They numb their own opinions and merge with others to keep the peace. The anger is still the driving force. It's just buried under this thick blanket of accommodation.
Wow. And what about the type 1?
A type 1 tries to perfectly control and repress their anger. They turn it inward into this relentless inner critic that demands absolute perfection.
That sounds exhausting. So then we move to the heart or feeling center, which is types 2, 3, and 4. And their core struggle is managing shame.
Right, shame.
A type 2, the helper, tries to control shame by being overly accommodating and indispensable. They believe that if everyone needs them, they can't possibly be rejected.
And a type 3, the achiever, deals with shame through sheer denial. They build this flawless, successful image.
Operating on the logic that if they're a verifiable winner, they cannot possibly be shameful.
Exactly. And a type 4, the individualist, manages shame by internalizing it. They basically lean into feeling fundamentally flawed.
They use their unique brokenness as an identity to separate themselves from a world they feel they don't fit into.
Yeah, it's deep.
Finally, we have the head or thinking center, which is types 5, 6, and 7. Their entire operating system is built around managing fear.
Okay, so a type 5, the investigator, handles fear by withdrawing from the demands of the world. They hoard knowledge, hoping that understanding everything will finally make them safe.
And a type 6, the loyalist, manages fear by constantly scanning the horizon for threats. They look outside themselves for security, clinging to belief systems, authorities, or just intense worst-case scenario planning.
And then there's the type 7, the enthusiast. They seem like the least fearful person in the room. They're usually the life of the party.
But the mechanism behind that behavior is actually avoidance.
Right. They run from their fear and inner anxiety by gluttonously distracting themselves with fun, exciting new options and experiences. The party is just a tool to escape the void.
It's just wild. So, you listening, consider your own internal engine right now. Do not ask yourself how you behave in a meeting. Ask yourself, what core emotion, anger, shame, or fear do you spend the most unconscious energy trying to manage or avoid every single day?
It really forces a level of introspection that most personality tests just completely avoid.
Yeah, it does. But, humans are not static creatures. We don't just stay angry or scared in the exact same way forever.
No, we adapt.
Right. A psychological model based purely on one static label would eventually fail to capture reality.
And that fluidity is exactly where the Enneagram gets its complexity.
Yeah.
The symbol itself operates as a map of movement.
So let's look at wings. The theory states that no one is a pure personality type. You're always mathematically and psychologically influenced by the numbers sitting directly adjacent to your main type on the circle.
The sources use a really great analogy here. Wings are like salt and pepper. They provide a distinct flavoring to your main type.
Okay, so mechanically, how does that work?
Take a type 4, the romantic individualist. A 4 has the option of leaning into a 3-wing or a 5-wing.
Okay.
A 3 is the achiever, obsessed with image and success. So if you take a 4's deep desire to be unique and inject it with a 3's drive to look successful, you create a very specific hybrid, the aristocrat.
Oh, interesting. So someone who wants to be uniquely elite, driven by both emotion and status.
Exactly. But look at the other side. A 5 is the investigator, someone who withdraws from the world to gather objective knowledge. Mix that with a 4's emotional depth, and you get the bohemian.
Oh, okay. So this person is much more intellectual, withdrawn, and idiosyncratic.
Yeah. They still share the exact same core fear of being insignificant, but the mechanism they use to navigate the world is entirely different because of that wing.
And the Enneagram accounts for even more movement with its internal lines, right? The ones called the arrows of integration and disintegration.
Yes. These lines map a really predictable behavioral shift when you're under severe stress and when you are experiencing profound growth.
And the sources offered this brilliant mathematical memory trick for the stress arrows. When disintegrating under stress, the types move along Gurdjieff's law of 7 in a specific sequence.
Right. It goes 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, and back to 1.
And the memory device is simple. 14 doubled is 28, and 28 doubled is 56, which is close enough to 57 to help you remember the sequence. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7.
That's such a good trick.
But what does that mathematical sequence actually mean for human behavior?
Let's follow a type 4 again. Under severe stress, the 4 follows the arrow to type 2.
Okay.
A 4 is naturally withdrawn and fiercely independent in their uniqueness. But when stressed, their coping mechanisms fail, and they adopt the unhealthy traits of a 2. They suddenly become clingy, overly dependent, and desperate for affection.
Oh, wow. And what about when they're growing?
Conversely, in a state of integration or growth, they move the opposite direction toward type 1. They abandon their emotional volatility to become more principled, objective, and disciplined.
It's honestly like a built-in map for catching yourself when you're spiraling.
It really is.
But there is another dimension to this map that measures how deep the spiral goes, right? Don Riso and Russ Hudson introduced what they called the levels of development.
Yeah, within every single type, there is a vertical ladder of 9 levels, ranging from healthy at the top to average in the middle down to unhealthy at the bottom.
And the crucial insight from Riso and Hudson is that these levels do not measure your mood.
Right.
They measure your capacity to be present.
Exactly. Moving down the levels means you are becoming deeply hypnotized by your own survival mechanisms. You're fully identified with your ego, deeply defensive, and driven entirely by those core fears.
Basically, you were wearing the armor Gurdjieff talked about, and you completely forgot how to take it off.
Yeah. But moving at the levels means you're waking up, you become freer, more objective, and way less driven by compulsive strategies.
So an unhealthy type 8 challenger looks like a terrifying, destructive tyrant. But a healthy type 8, with a high capacity for presence, uses that exact same powerful energy to become a magnanimous, protective hero.
Same core motivation, just a radically different level of consciousness.
Which makes this an incredibly rich tool for personal development. But, I mean, if a system depends entirely on your self-awareness, your stress levels, and your capacity to be present, mapping that objectively in a clinical laboratory sounds like a total nightmare.
Oh, it's a huge nightmare, especially when you add the final layer of complexity, the instincts.
Right. Because we all have 3 basic biological survival strategies hardwired into us: self-preservation, social, and one-to-one, which is often referred to as the sexual instinct.
And if you multiply the 9 Enneagram types by these 3 dominant instincts, you generate 27 distinct subtypes. Yeah, and this mechanism explains why 2 people who test as the exact same Enneagram type can exhibit completely contradictory behaviors.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, so a self-preservation 7 channels their gluttony into securing physical resources, comforts, and safe experiences. They look radically different from a social 7, who channels their gluttony into an idealized vision of the world, often sacrificing their own desires for the good of a group.
Okay, so we have 9 types: wings, stress arrows, levels of presence, and 27 subtypes. Let's put this through the statistical blender, because for anyone listening wondering if this is just a highly subjective pseudoscience, the sources do include a rigorous thesis study.
They do. It analyzed the Open Enneagram of Personality Scales, or the OEPS.
Right, and the OEPS study utilized a massive sample size, over 1,000 participants.
Yeah, the goal was to test if a specific Enneagram questionnaire could hold up to the strict standards of psychometrics. And the conclusion was pretty stark. The OEPS lacked strong reliability and validity.
What are the specific metrics behind that failure? I mean, how bad was it?
Well, in psychological testing, for a tool to be considered reliable, meaning it produces consistent results if a person takes it multiple times, you generally require a retest correlation of 0.70 or higher.
And what did the OEPS get?
It averaged a 0.68, so it fell short of the standard. Furthermore, the researchers ran a confirmatory factor analysis.
So in plain terms, they fed all the thousands of test answers into an algorithm to see if the data naturally clumped into 9 distinct psychological profiles.
Exactly. And the math basically failed to support a clean 9-type structure. The statistical borders between the types just blurred way too much for clinical validation.
Okay, but here's the thing. If it fails the hard math, why is this system so enduringly popular? Why are massive data-driven Fortune 500 corporations like GM, Sony, Adobe, and Toyota relying on a test that scores a 0.68 in a lab?
It's a great question. The difficulty lies in the premise of the test itself. You're asking people to accurately self-report on the very unconscious motivations their egos are specifically designed to hide from them.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. However, the study wasn't a total invalidation of the framework. While it struggled to prove the 9 clean categories, it did find expected, predictable correlations with the big 5 personality traits.
Which is basically the gold standard of scientifically validated personality testing.
Yes. So the underlying signals are real.
So if a type 8 is supposedly driven by anger and aggression, do they score exceptionally high in extroversion and low in agreeableness on the big 5?
Precisely. Extroversion on the big 5 positively correlated exactly as expected with the assertive Enneagram types, which are 3, 7, and 8. Conscientiousness strongly correlated with the perfectionistic type 1.
So the synthesis of this research suggests that the tool's true value lies in subjective self-discovery, coaching, and team dynamics rather than rigid clinical diagnosis.
Exactly. It is a framework for growth, not a medical label.
And that framework for growth brings us to its practical utility. Michael Hyatt, a well-known leadership expert, breaks down how this is being used in modern business.
Oh, his insights are fascinating.
Yeah, he points out that the ultimate goal of the Enneagram isn't just navel-gazing self-awareness. It's the how so.
Well, if you know your colleague is a Type 9 peacemaker, and you watch them suddenly become anxious, reactive, and entirely doubtful of themselves, you know they are sliding down their stress arrow toward Type 6.
So you don't just discipline them for acting out of character, you recognize the mechanism of the stress response.
Exactly.
Hmm.
You know that their growth arrow points toward Type 3, so you intervene by helping them find their voice, focus on a clear goal, and take decisive action.
It completely shifts the dynamic from judging behavior to actually supporting a human being.
It really does.
Man, we've covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We traced the lineage from Evagrius's ancient demons in the desert, through Gurdjieff's mathematical laws, all the way to Naranjo's psychological synthesis.
And we explored a dynamic system that uses wings, arrows, and levels of presence to challenge us to look past our observable habits and really confront our deepest fears and highest potentials.
It's a map that constantly reminds us we are not static. We are always moving toward integration or disintegration.
Absolutely. And as we close, I want to leave you with a final thought that returns to Gurdjieff's original, broader use of this symbol.
Yeah, tell us about that.
He insisted the Enneagram was a universal process diagram. He believed you could map literally anything on it. A business plan, a New Year's resolution, a creative project.
Wow.
But he taught that any process will naturally lose energy, face friction, and drift off course, unless it receives conscious shocks at specific intervals to keep it alive.
Conscious interventions to maintain momentum.
Yes. So for you listening, what if we applied the Enneagram, not just to figure out who we are internally, but to track the health of the things we build?
That's a great question.
Think about your current career path, or your most important relationship, or even just a project you're struggling with right now. If that project had a personality type, what would its stress areas look like?
Yeah.
Are the people involved disintegrating into reactive patterns?
And most importantly, what is the conscious, intentional shock you need to introduce today to push that endeavor back toward integration and growth? From diagnosing the hidden engine of our own hearts to diagnosing the engine of our most important work. That is an incredible lens to view the world through.
It really is.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Enneagram. We encourage you to keep exploring your own underlying motivations, because once you finally understand the why, the what starts to make a whole lot more sense.
This is Seek and Explain. Like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy your stay.